We're already living in a world where you can't believe your own eyes. I've never experienced that before, but I'm experiencing it a lot these days.
You can't believe what you see. Yeah, well, here's hoping. I guarantee you, though, you can believe what you hear. Welcome in. It's Now and Next. I'm Dave Trafford, and it's been good to have the show back on the rails. You're just picking us up right now. Go back and listen to the conversations. Had a great one-on-one with retired Major General from the RCAF, Scott Clancy, on the future of NORAD, the future of NATO, given Mark Carney's New World Vision and how that plays into it. And a fairly provocative discussion with David Schultz, professor of political science and U.S. constitutional law. He teaches at Hamline University in Minnesota, and of course that's been ground zero for all of the ICE antics that we have seen of late. That's on Now and Next. This week, you heard the voice of Bob Reid. Bob Reid is here from Broadway Strategy and Communications, Lindsay Broadhead from Broadhead Communications, and Anne-Marie Aikins of AMA Communications, and they are our cast on Now and Next, our comms and strategy team. And this week, we start the conversation with Davos. I'm surprised a little bit, Bob, that the Davos speech by Prime Minister Carney, we're still talking about it 2.5 weeks later. Does that surprise you at all?
No, not in the least, just because it was such a big deal and such a big departure in the messaging that we've heard from Mark Carney all the way through. And to me, I think that was his biggest pivot point since he's become prime minister. Because up until Davos, it was all about working positively with the U.S. Yeah, we're also going to diversify our trade base, but still with that candle in the window for some kind of deal with the Americans that would ease the tensions, would ease the tariffs, probably not eliminate them. He was clear about that. But it was such a stark departure, declaring that the old rules-based order of the world doesn't exist anymore, and middle powers have to band together and forge a new path and control their own destinies and can't be linked to the big major powers anymore. We haven't heard a prime minister say that in my lifelong memory anyway, and I'm sure you'd have to go back a long way to find such a declaration of independence, if you will, that we're not going to play this game anymore. So because it was so stark, because it was so different, and because I think it resonated so strongly with Canadians who are frustrated with Trump and the U.S. and are also our inability to get where we originally hoped to get, that's why we're still talking about it, and I think we will for quite some time to come.
Lindsay, I saw David Coletto's piece on Substack, and it's the latest research from Abacus, and it was his suggestion is, based on the research that they're doing, is that Canadian attitudes almost mirror exactly the attitudes that were being expressed by the Prime Minister in Davos. So, again, the timing of the politics in this is really interesting, because it would appear that this PMO has its finger on the pulse of Canadians in terms of their attitudes, more so than, to Bob's point, any PMO we've seen in a long time.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons to the question that you punted to Bob too, why we're still talking about this. It was so relevant and poignant and hit the center of the target, not just for whoever identifies as liberal, because I'm actually starting to think these terms are less and less important. And Coletto's data actually shows that in many ways. Our support for the leaders is completely different than our support for the parties that they represent in many cases. What was so striking to me was the kind of feeble response from opposition. What I heard was, when you broke it all down, they agreed with the prime minister. Mm-hmm. So when you cut it, you try to politicize, not you, when one tries to politicize these things, it actually is irrelevant. He was able to capture the spirit of not just the cohort who voted him in either. I think he tapped into the spirit of youth. I think he tapped into the spirit of a lot of the conversations around immigration and religion and the things that are dividing us. I think he's also tapped into the spirit of our country that we know is so divided right now. And then just one last bit that I think is probably the most relevant is I think he tapped into the spirit of Europe. And it wasn't defined by our border. His words actually transcended and performed the thing he was trying to do and has been doing. And I'm not saying this as fangirling on the side. I'm just immensely impressed by, in fact, what I saw as hardcore action, not inaction, which was the critique by few.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, when we look at that from the European perspective, it was interesting to me. The Prime Minister quoted the Finnish Prime Minister in using the phrase value-based reality, but he was saying out loud and almost gave permission to members of the EU to follow suit and say, oh, yeah, you know what, I kind of agree with that. And I'm badly paraphrasing, but he was giving them permission to say out loud what they had been saying behind closed doors, it seems, for some time.
I think you're right. I think his speech, it was so unlike political key messages or any key messages. It was clear. It was unique in that the talent of, he's such a wordsmith, and he uses it was just a beautiful, beautiful communication piece. And, we all have heard that he wrote it himself. And I think he was really speaking from not only his head and what he understands and that leadership that we're all still looking for, but his heart as well. And so I think that's how he was speaking to the world, and in particular Europe. When have we ever paid attention to a speech at Davos before? Because it's not like they don't happen every year, I believe. I think it's every year. Mm-hmm. This one we paid attention to, and as you said, 2 weeks later, we're still talking about it. And I think it shows, I think, now anything the opposition says, we kind of compare it to that speech and the leadership that he showed. And it's that's what faced Poilievre going into his leadership race, of course, was he's falling on the tails of that speech, and he had to try to meet the moment. He clearly met the moment for Conservatives.
So before we get into that, I just want to, you as you put yourself in that room as the comms person advising the Prime Minister, and he says, Anne-Marie, I'm going to write my own speech. What's your reaction?
Well, my understanding, because my team at Curious Public is Lloyd Rang has worked on his team as a speechwriter. So I would have, as a comms person, normally gone, okay, you want to do a first draft? We'll look at that. But Lloyd has the experience of knowing that that's him, that's how he does work, and that he is a very, very talented writer and a speaker. So. He was not surprised, and that was very interesting to me, that he wasn't surprised at all that he wrote it, and it sounded like him. And he was. It's very difficult. One of the tasks we have to do as comms people is capture the voice of our leaders that we're writing for, and can be a real challenge, especially when you're coming new to a file. I've just gotten some new files with Curious Public, and big files, and capturing everyone's voice it's a learning curve for sure. But it's a unique voice for sure.
There's no question, and part of that, Lindsay, is his experience as the Bank of Canada governor, and then in a similar job in the UK, and the Treasury Secretary in the United States saying, well, we know what happens when technocrats get into politics. It doesn't work out very well. He used his voice and experience as the quote unquote technocrat to sound authentic. And I thought that was remarkable.
It was awesome. I'm a corporate girl at the end of the day, right? I'm not a political one in the traditional sense. And I enjoy when a company is run well. It lifts people up. You get awesome talent. You get things done. I'm not naive enough to, so naive that to think that politics can be erased from his job. But the speech that he wrote, it's less about the pen to paper that would have worried me as the comms person. It would have been the after effect and the impact of saying we're taking our, the metaphorical sign out of the window. That's when he threw down the gauntlet, and that's an international relations statement. So as the comms team, my assumption is that they were moving towards that space and knew that is what this was all culminating in. And it's going to be fascinating. I hope there is a debrief of this when dust settles, however many years from now, because there have been weeks and months where there's been silence in response to Trump, or there's been, a quick phrase back and forth, the interdynamics with our premiers as well. There's a lot going on behind the scenes right now that none of us can pretend to know anything about. We're all just, picking up breadcrumbs. But yeah, sorry, I bounced around a bit there. But that's what's so great about this moment is we're seeing a leader. God bless us. We haven't seen one in a really long time anywhere. So this is awesome.
Well, and Bob, when we look at that from that perspective, in terms of this whole, it's almost a disruptive force in our domestic and to some degree global politics in terms of what that leadership label means now, and not to get too far down the rabbit hole and suggest that everything's fine. I think what's misunderstood from his speech, as far as I watched some of the analysis and listened to it, is that the criticism to Lindsay's point being, well, okay, talk is great, but we got to get down to getting stuff done is one thing. As if we haven't been getting things done. But there's this sense that he's risking it because he's going to go it alone without the Americans. That's not what he said.
No, that's the shorthand that got picked up. And that again flows from what a change in tune it is, because as a country, and Canada's not alone in this, we've all been bouncing around in Trump's wake, trying to figure out, okay, how do we reposition? How do we point the bow so that we don't get swamped by the next wave that he puts out? It's all been responsive that way, and trying to figure out how do we navigate these churning waters that this polarizing figure in the White House keeps generating. That's been the strategy up until now. And the Davos moment was, we're turning the ship in a different direction. Not that we're going to leave those waters completely behind, but we're going to get out of this churn and chop and set out on a path that's going to take us somewhere else, which, of course, is leadership. It's also... And back to Lindsay's point about the repercussions of the speech and what was the thinking around that. I think the thinking was pretty clear that we can't keep trying the same approach. We can't keep trying appeasement. We can't keep trying pointing to our longstanding history and the integration of our economies and how important it is to workers and everything else, all of which is true. But the old definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We kept doing that over and over again. It started with Trudeau. It continued under Carney in the early months, and it got us absolutely nowhere. So I think the political calculus was already done that we're not going to get anywhere if we keep doing this. It will eventually hurt us politically because we'll be seen to be getting nowhere, despite trying all these things. So we've got to cut the cord here. We've got to move in a different direction.
So to that point, Bob, how do you think that that informed or shaped Poilievre's performance in Calgary, a week and a half later? Because there's a sense that there was a lot of pressure on him to change his tone and everything else. But there's also a certain analysis that says what he did there had to be done based on what Carney did in Davos.
Well, Poilievre's got a line to walk, and he's very clearly tried to do that, and I think to a degree successfully did in Calgary. And the sides of that line are, staying true to conservative principles and not abandoning and not changing dramatically, but changing enough to demonstrate that things have changed and there does need to be an adjustment anyway. I wouldn't call it a change for Poilievre, but an adjustment. And you heard it he still pointed out all the things that are wrong and why the promise doesn't hold true anymore and people are frustrated, all of those sort of negative feelings, which he has to give voice to because they exist. There are a lot of people who are frustrated, who feel that they're getting passed by, who feel that they're doing all the right things and working as hard as they can and not being able to get anywhere, but also backed with a sense of we need to work constructively to fix these problems and laying out some specific promises and that kind of thing. To me, it was a very different tone because, again, the landscape has changed. Before, it was all Justin Trudeau's fault. Justin Trudeau has brought all of this on you by his policies, his actions, his virtue signaling, his everything. It's all his fault. Anything that's wrong in your life is his fault. Well, he's gone, and because Carney is in a position of strength, he does need to adjust. And I think we saw some adjustment there. Again, it's not dramatic, but I think it was a bit of a course correction while trying to stay true to the conservative principles thing and not bringing wholesale change to the table.
Well, Anne-Marie, one of the things that struck me, and to Bob's point around adjustment, was just in terms of the focus of in the past, it was not unusual to hear the tone or the theme of a speech from Poilievre saying this country is broken. I mean, we heard that often, but he ended with a flourish in Calgary saying, not only do we live in the greatest country in the world, the best is yet to come. That was a complete about face. Yep. And say what you will about the authenticity of that. To me, that's the bell he needed to ring.
I agree. He needed to give some hope, and that he did. He needed to appear more positive, and that he did. Though, I've watched the speech, and he did have a smile on his face the whole time. But I've always found his smile disingenuous, and that's the way I was feeling. I kept feeling like, stop smiling like that because it's not ringing truthful for me. But I agree. Because 75% of his talking points were the same old talking points, but he did end on this hopeful note. And I think Canadians are really looking for a leader that's going to give them some hope. And yes, talk about affordability. He did that quite well. But I'm not sure the criticism of Carney that there's no action, isn't going to ring true. I think people felt there was a lot of action in the Davos speech. I think there's things like the C.A.S.T. Legislation that's getting pushed through. I think they see him doing stuff, and where the action was going into the election was, I'll get a new deal. That's a new trade deal. That's everybody was expecting the new trade deal. But I believe Carney has rightfully so moved away from that. That isn't, we're in a new time now, and that can't be the goal, because even if we did get a new deal, Trump could change it 2 seconds later. So I think he's moved away from that, and he's just doing things like and making new trade deals with other countries that are clearly pissing off Trump, because he's gotten pissed off about the Chinese deal. So I think that he's going to have trouble to drill home that he's not doing anything, that there's no action, because I think people are believing there is action.
Well, the part of that underlying that, though, Lindsay, has been the secret sauce of the Prime Minister to be able to change our expectations. I mean, to some degree, we, generally speaking, again, going back to David Coletto's research, there's been a shift in that expectation of what we were hoping to get from the Prime Minister. But the Conservatives, you made the point earlier about, their initial reaction, the criticism. I was pleasantly surprised to see the first lines out of, the opposition where that was a good speech. Good on him. Again, that was an adjustment in posture from the party itself, not just from the leader. And I thought, okay, that we're picking up the ball here. And there is an understanding now that given the Prime Minister's posture, we need opposition that is not only prepared to be critical, we need to have them understand that we need to express the expectations of Canadians in a positive way, as opposed to Canada's broken.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot in what you just said. The Conservative Poilievre speech for me was quite epically different than what we've seen before. Not so much in word, but maybe in what he didn't say. For me, if I'm going to grossly oversimplify, it has to do kind of with the head and heart element, right? Whereas when Trudeau was in power, he was liquid heart. Everything was hugs and rainbows and sunny ways.
Sunny ways.
Yes, all this stuff, right? There was very little intellect involved. And Carney has stolen that, right? In his 18-minute Davos speech, you can't have a more intellectual platform. He referenced high touch literature. He referenced all these international relations, things that the man on the street, the everyday person doesn't relate to. It's not that we can't understand. Its speech was excellent. We all understood. And that again, why it was so great. But then you contrast that now with Poilievre, who before, when Trudeau was in power, his videos were all intellect, right? Big words, long sentences, loads of adjectives that you're being showered with. Now he seems to have taken this 48-minute speech of heart. It was about hope. It was about on the ground what we can touch and feel and what Canadians are experiencing. What a path that is, because he's setting course, an absolute juxtaposition. In every conversation now, he's going to have a clear juxtaposition of where Carney sits, where he'll be approaching things, unless Carney can come down, right? And that's what people are saying, more action. They want him to come down and make it evident for the people, as it were. So for me, it was just this incredible contrast of head and heart. I don't know if there's something in that. Well, I'll keep an eye on it looking forward as well. But now we have a bit of a battle in the House. There'll be something clear to argue about.
Bob, it struck me when I kind of confronted the speech by Poilievre that he was at a leadership review convention where he got, 87.4% approval, which is, I think beats expectation based on some of the prognostication I heard prior to the gathering. But what I found ironic is that the character of Poilievre that we have all described up until a week and a half ago is what the base loves. They like that. They like the scrapper. They like the guy who's smarmy. They like the guy who's going to be, picking a barroom fight with somebody. He wasn't talking to them at the convention. He had broadened things out. He delivered a speech that didn't necessarily resonate with the very core of the party.
Oh, I would disagree with that. I think there was plenty of red meat in there for the base because he's in a room full of Conservative Party members, and he's got to ring the bells that resonate with them. And he did that when he talked about guns and other things that were, right in the wheelhouse for particularly Alberta Conservatives. But there was that other dimension as well that everybody's talked about positivity looking forward, about hope. Dave, your point about his closing line that the best is yet to come. That's the change in tone. The core substantive Conservative points were there, but the change in tone was really noticeable, I thought. Here's what I think is going to be the contrast. I'm already seeing it, and I think it's going to become more stark unless Carney can make some adjustments as well between the two of them. Carney is the global statesman. He's the high level, making deals with this country, that trading zone, all of that high level international stuff, which is important and which connects with the economy. But it's so far up there and out there. It's not Main Street level. And that's where Poilievre's strength has lied, on affordability issues, on the day-to-day things that people see, touch, feel, and especially feel in their wallets. That's been his really strong area, and that's going to continue for sure. Carney's got to get a lot more eye level, because as important as the moves that he's making, the deals that he's cutting, and this direction of, middle powers around the world and a new economic order and all that stuff, it's all important. It's all really smart, but it takes a long time to actually translate into results. And so back to your, getting things done challenge, he needs to shift and demonstrate that he's doing things that people can feel right now. And I think that's exactly why we saw a few days ago the announcement about the change in the C.A.S.T rebate to help people specifically with the cost of groceries. We'll need to see, or he needs to do more of that to get back down to the Main Street eye level. I think that's what he's been lacking, and I think that's where Poilievre's had his strength.
So on the whole get her done file, though, Henry, the contrast for me is that the Prime Minister's being held his feet to the fire on, now we want to see some results. We want to see how it's going to affect me in my daily life, and et cetera. That's one thing. And I don't disagree necessarily with that. If you're going to, talk the talk, walk the walk, I get it. But I just find it really interesting when the first ministers all got together and we heard various premiers, that is, start to talk about the projects that they need to get done. Doug Ford, he's got to be one of the longest serving premiers in that group and wants to keep serving, apparently. The idea that he keeps talking about, well, we need to have affordable housing and we need to do these things. And he keeps ringing bells that he rang in the 2018 election that aren't getting done. So, but we're cutting the Premier of Ontario slack in that respect, as opposed to holding him to the same level of intense accountability that we expect of the Prime Minister.
Well, I think I agree. I agree. But the Premier gives this impression to many people, especially the people that support him, I think, that he is getting all kinds of crap done. Like he's constantly out there saying, look what we've done. And many people disagree with those things that he's done. The Ontario Place, all those kind of deals, all those deals with the skills development funds and all, there's a lot of stuff that maybe won't pass the smell test in the end. But it gives the impression that he really, really is out there doing stuff. That's that, and he's constantly in the news, but in a very orchestrated way. But and then we seem to cut him slack with all these scandals too. It's that. But I think that it's going to be a challenge for him for the next election, because I think some of these scandals are really going to catch up. I have been saying that, though. I will be the first to admit I have been saying that. And
you're in a long line.
But they're piling up. And some of them, I think they're going to be really hard to reconcile in the end. I think the reason that they haven't resonated with the public as much, and we've given them slack, is because the opposition hasn't been as strong as it could be on those issues. As much as they're out there and they try, they're just not resonating as much as they could. So it's a puzzle, but I think he has rightly connected with Carney. He realizes how popular he is, distanced himself from Poilievre, and him and Carney are like buddies that hang out together, and he challenges them when he knows full well in 2 days he's going to get that phone call he's been complaining about, that sort of thing. Feels a little, again, to me, a little orchestrated. I'll use that word again.
Well, he's a craftsman. I mean, I think that's far as the retail politics is concerned, and he's doing what Bob's suggesting the Prime Minister needs to do more of. in terms of making sure that there's an eye-level response. And
I think his comms team, the Prime Minister's comms team, has realized that, because haven't you noticed lately there are more man on the street type events?
Sure, pizza shop, all kinds of things. Yeah.
Super. They capitalized on that, the popularity of heated rivalry that even came up at the first ministers' meeting, which was hilarious. If you watched Doug Ford's face, it was a smile, but I'm not sure he was appreciating the heated rivalry comment. But in any event, I think he is learning from that retail politics, which could be from some of it from Doug Ford. But I have to give credit. You named it, Dave, earlier in our conversation about the PMOs, their comms strategy. I think has been spot on, and they have been, for a new prime minister, really skilled at their job.
Before we go, Lindsay, you brought this to our attention, and it's been in the headlines of the last few days, talking about U.S.-Canada relations, and specifically, Warren Buffett's take on what's been going on. And what became apparent fairly quickly was that this long 22-minute, I think, video on YouTube was a deep fake. And here's my reaction to this. I saw it kind of in the corner of my eye, so to speak, on the YouTube and commentary around what Warren Buffett thinks. And I like to think I'm paying attention. But what came at me immediately, I thought, that's not unreasonable. Okay, that's what Warren Buffett thinks. But then to later find out that it was a deep fake. How do you navigate a comms strategy politically when you can be that good at what happened with the Warren Buffett video? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the question is I don't know.
Yeah.
For me, this was an article by Alex Boyd in the Star, and I think it touched on the surface of what we're going to be seeing constantly. If you, especially from the States, if you're sitting with your own owned platform in the form of a podcast, let's say, and you have north of 500,000, 1 million viewers, think of the content you can create. If you are a government and you can create your own YouTube channels in 2.2 seconds and flush the channels with any content you want, this is a moment of talk about rupture. This is rupture. Axios this morning even called it, I've written it down here, I think they called, I don't know, I can't find it. I think they called it the post-news era. From a news, like that to me is absolute rupture, where we don't know or trust and we can barely keep pace with President Trump's own news cycle that he's putting forward purposefully, right? Going incredibly fast, changing the news moment and what we're looking at. Here's a shiny toy, looking back and forth, ignoring the facts. And if you add to that an incomplete ecosystem of equally disruptive, falsified, mistrusted content pieces, we're in a new era. And this conversation could go on forever, right? Where each of us are served up our own algorithms. So even the four of us who follow, similar things, I'd imagine, we're all getting served up different content pieces that we have to negotiate and decipher as to whether it's authentic or not.
Yeah,
wow.
I think in my own feed, Bob, when I see, what did Kevin O'Leary do now, I'm a little leery of those thumbnails on YouTube. But here's the thing that struck me about it when I read more about the Warren Buffett thing. There were parts of it that weren't unreasonable, that kind of struck me as saying, oh, that's pretty interesting
that's
insight.
What AI does.
Well, but
right?
Okay, but so here's what it is. It is the danger of AI that it's mis or disinformation, or that Bob is being reasonable, and that's what draws me in as a fairly, I would like to think, careful consumer of this stuff.
Well, whether it's the AI itself that's figured it out, or the people who program it or feed it, I don't know, but they do that because it works. You know, as you said, Warren Buffett sounded like he was saying things, AI Warren Buffett sounded like he was saying things that real Warren Buffett would say and that would make sense. And that's why they do it that way. Because let's remember, it's all clickbait.
Oh, sure.
That's why this stuff gets made. That's the purpose of it. So there's no surprise there. But it's just so damn chilling because it looks so real at first blush. Yeah. I saw the Warren Buffett thing pop up in my feed, and I'm like, Warren Buffett's talking about Canada and saying Carney is making – I want to hear that. And I started watching it, and the first little bit, I thought, wow, this is fascinating. And then I went, this is just way too weird as it went on. You know, the broadcaster guy in me picked up on just the cadence of the delivery and the fact that nobody asked a question and he spoke for 40 minutes and all of that. And there was no obvious edits that you're watching clips from a conversation. It just seemed to be one stream of consciousness thing. But it was obviously compelling. And it was well enough done that it really terrified me because this stuff's only going to continue to get better.
Well,
if
go ahead and finish.
If we zoom back out from that, this is an ongoing march to the end of truth or the end of veracity. We're already living in a world where you can't believe your own eyes. Mm-hmm. And I've never experienced that before, but I'm experiencing it a lot these days, like so many of us are. And it started, it's not all Trump, but remember, Trump in his first term was hammering away about fake news, the fake news. He didn't invent it. He knew a lot of people felt that way, and he tapped into it. And he continues to run with that. So that seed gets further established in people's minds that the news is fake. You can't really believe what you see. And conversely, then you get these deep fakes that come along that are so convincing that will play to people who are predisposed to want to hear what the deep fake is telling them and say, you see, here's the real truth. Here's what's really going on. And again, we're on a path that's heading to we're not going to be able to believe anything, but at the same time, we're going to be so vulnerable to manipulation by people who know how to push these buttons and pull the levers, as the man behind the curtain does, to fool us all. It's frightening.
Yeah, it occurs to me that unlike human nature, we don't learn from our lessons. AI does. And it will just get better. So it will take the Warren Buffett example. Okay, there was something wrong with that. I'm going to fix that moving forward. So the next time I'm going to get Bob to really watch the whole thing and believe that it's Warren Buffett. That's the scary part of it for me. All right, let's leave it there. This was a great reboot of the C.A.S.T, our comms and strategy team. Bob Reid, Anne-Marie Aikins, Lindsay Broadhead. I'm Dave Trafford. Thanks for being here. This is Now and Next. And by the way, check out our On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. It'll be in your feed this week, and the crew's back together. And again, long before the legislature gets back to business, which is, I don't know, sometime in the summer or whenever. They've taken just forever off. There's still lots to talk about. Thanks for joining us. It's Now and Next. I'm Dave Trafford.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.